Jack Turner was not the kind of man who stood out in a crowd. He was average height, with sun-kissed skin from years of working under the hood of cars, and a pair of calloused hands that told stories of hard work. His small auto repair shop sat at the edge of Maplewood, a quiet town where everyone knew each other's names. Jack's garage wasn't fancy, just a modest building with rusted tools hanging on the walls and oil-stained floors, but it had earned him a reputation as the best mechanic around. People trusted him because he didn't just fix their vehicles, he treated them like they mattered. Whether it was a teenager bringing in their first car or an elderly neighbor needing help with a decades-old truck, Jack always went above and beyond. On this particular afternoon, the sky was heavy with clouds and the air smelled of rain. Jack had been tidying up his workspace, sweeping away bits of metal shavings and wiping down his tools after finishing a long day of repairs. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, signaling that it was almost time to close up shop. Just as he reached for the light switch, the distant rumble of an engine caught his attention. At first, he thought it might be one of his regular customers stopping by to pick up their vehicle, but when he stepped outside, what he saw made him pause. Dusty, dented Jeep crawled into his driveway, sputtering and groaning like it might give up entirely at any moment. Its paint job, or what was left of it, was faded and scratched, and mud caked its tires and undercarriage. It looked like it had survived more than its fair share of rough roads. Behind the wheel sat a man whose appearance matched the condition of the Jeep, disheveled, weary, and clearly in need of assistance. He wore a plain jacket, dark pants, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. As he climbed out of the driver's seat, Jack noticed the man moved with purpose, despite his unkempt look. Something about him felt off. Not dangerous exactly, but different. The stranger approached Jack cautiously, glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to appear behind him. "You're still open, right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. There was a hint of urgency in his tone, though he tried to mask it. "Just about to close," Jack replied, leaning against the doorframe. "What's the problem?" The man gestured toward the Jeep. "It broke down a few miles back. I managed to limp it here, but I don't think it'll make it much farther without some serious work." He paused, then added, "I'll pay whatever you're asking. Double your usual rate, even." Jack raised an eyebrow. Most people haggled over prices, especially for older vehicles like this one. But this guy wasn't negotiating. He was practically begging. Still, Jack hesitated. Something about the situation didn't sit quite right. The man hadn't introduced himself, and his nervous energy was hard to ignore. On the other hand, fixing broken-down cars was Jack's job, and turning away, paying customers wasn't exactly good for business. "I can take a look," Jack said finally, grabbing his toolbox. "But no promises until I see what we're dealing with." The stranger nodded quickly. "Fair enough, thanks, I really appreciate it." He extended a hand. "Name's Gray. Just call me Mr. Gray." Jack shook his hand briefly before turning his attention to the Jeep. Kneeling beside it, he popped open the hood and peered inside. What he found surprised him. Beneath layers of dirt and grime, the engine was surprisingly complex, far more advanced than anything he'd expect to find in a beat-up old vehicle like this. Some of the parts looked custom-made, and others seemed oddly out of place, as if they'd been retrofitted from entirely different machines. It was clear someone had put a lot of effort and money into modifying this Jeep. But why go through all that trouble just to disguise it as an ordinary clunker? Curiosity got the better way of him. "This thing's seen better days, Jackie," remarked casually as he inspected the wiring. "Looks like it's been through hell and back." Mr. Gray chuckled dryly. "Yeah, you could say that. Let's just say it's had a rough life." Jack glanced up at him. "Mind telling me what you use it for? These kinds of modifications aren't cheap." For a split second, Mr. Gray's expression flickered, almost imperceptibly, but enough for Jack to notice. Then, just as quickly, the man shrugged and smiled faintly. "Nothing exciting, trust me. Just a hobby project gone wrong." Jack wanted to press further, but he decided against it. Mechanics weren't supposed to pry, too. deeply into their customers' lives, and besides, he had a job to do. Whatever secrets this Jeep held, they weren't his concern, or so he told himself. As the rain began to fall softly around them, Jack rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Each bolt he loosened and each wire he traced revealed more surprises. The Jeep was a patchwork of contradictions. Ancient components mixed with cutting-edge technology, practical fixes layered over bizarre design choices. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces didn't fit. Yet, despite its quirks, there was something oddly fascinating about it. Every time Jack thought he'd uncovered its last secret, another one emerged. Hours passed, and the storm outside grew heavier. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the garage in brief bursts of light. Through it all, Mr. Gray stayed close, watching Jack's every move with silent intensity. Occasionally, he'd pace near the entrance, glancing outside as if expecting trouble. Other times, he'd hover nearby, muttering vague instructions that only deepened Jack's suspicions. By the time Jack tightened the final bolt and stepped back, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The Jeep roared to life, its engine purring smoothly, a stark contrast to the wheezing wreck it had been earlier. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and turned to Mr. Gray. "She's ready to go," he announced. "Should hold up for a while, assuming you don't push her too hard." Mr. Gray exhaled sharply, visibly relieved. "You've done me a huge favor, Jack. I won't forget this." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a thick envelope stuffed with cash and handed it over without counting. "Like I said, double your rate. Keep the change." Jack accepted the payment, feeling a mixed glee and unease. This was easily the most he'd ever been paid for a single job, but the whole encounter left him unsettled. As Mr. Gray climbed back into the Jeep and drove off into the night, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just played a small part in something much bigger than he understood. As the Jeep disappeared into the rainy night, Jack stood in the doorway of his garage, staring after it. The envelope of cash felt heavy in his hand, but it wasn't the weight of the money that bothered him. It was the lingering sense of mystery surrounding Mr. Gray and his peculiar vehicle. There was something about the way the man had acted, the urgency in his voice, the constant glances over his shoulder, and the strange modifications to the Jeep that gnawed at Jack's curiosity. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled into a situation far beyond his usual line of work. Jack closed the garage door and locked it behind him, then headed inside to clean up. As he washed his hands in the sink, his mind kept replaying the details of the evening. The Jeep hadn't just been old or neglected, it had been deliberately altered. Those custom parts weren't the kind of thing you'd find in a hobbyist's garage. They were precision-engineered, expensive, and designed for a specific purpose. And while Jack wasn't an expert on military equipment, some of the components looked suspiciously like they belonged in vehicles used for covert operations. Why would someone go to such lengths to disguise advanced technology in a beat-up old Jeep? And why had Mr. Gray been so evasive about its purpose? Unable to let it go, Jack decided to take a closer look at the tools and scraps he'd removed from the Jeep during the repairs. Maybe there was a clue hidden among the discarded pieces. He grabbed a flashlight and returned to the garage, rummaging through his workspace until he found the pile of old bolts, wires, and metal fragments he'd replaced earlier. At first glance, they seemed unremarkable, just the usual remnants of a repair job. But as he examined them more closely, one item caught his eye. It was a small circuit board, no bigger than his palm, with intricate patterns etched onto its surface. Jack wasn't an electronics expert, but even he could tell this wasn't your average car part. The design was sleek and compact, unlike anything he'd ever seen in a civilian vehicle. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting it carefully, and noticed faint markings along the edges, numbers and letters that might have been a serial number or some kind of code. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in a rusted-out Jeep driven by a mysterious stranger. Jack set the circuit board aside and continued sifting through the pile, finding more oddities. A reinforced steel plate that had been welded beneath the chassis, likely to protect against impacts or bullets. A GPS unit that looked far too advanced for basic navigation. Even the tires had been modified with specialized treads designed for rough terrain. Every new discovery only deepened the puzzle. This wasn't just a hobby project gone wrong, as Mr. Gray had claimed. Someone had invested significant time, effort, and resources into turning this Jeep into something extraordinary and secretive. Now the rain had stopped and the world outside was eerily quiet. Jack sat down on a stool, rubbing his temples as he tried to make sense of it all. Who was Mr. Gray, really? What was he doing with a vehicle like this? And why had he chosen Jack's garage, of all places, to fix it? The questions swirled in his mind unanswered, leaving him restless and uneasy. For a moment he considered calling the police, but what would he say? That he'd fixed a weird Jeep and thought its owner might be up to no good? They'd probably laugh him off, or worse, accuse him of being paranoid. Instead, Jack decided to do a little digging on his own. He booted up his laptop, which sat on a cluttered desk in the corner of his living room, and began searching online for information. He started with the basics: modified Jeeps, custom military vehicles, covert operation cars. Most of the results were useless: forums discussing off-road enthusiasts or articles about classic car restorations. But a few links stood out. One article described how certain groups retrofitted civilian vehicles with military-grade technology to evade detection. Another mentioned recent reports of stolen equipment from nearby bases, though the details were vague. The more Jack read, the more convinced he became that Mr. Gray was involved in something dangerous. It wasn't hard to connect the dots: a heavily modified Jeep, secretive behavior, and a willingness to pay exorbitant amounts of money to keep it running smoothly. But what exactly was he involved in? Was he a criminal, a spy, or something else entirely? Jack's imagination ran wild, conjuring images of secret missions, high-speed chases, and shadowy organizations operating just out of sight. Just as he was about to close his laptop, another thought struck him. What if Mr. Gray came back? If the Jeep broke down again, or if he needed more repairs, there was a good chance he'd return to Jack's garage. And if Jack was right about the man's intentions, that could put him in serious danger. Suddenly, the cozy safety of his home felt less secure. He glanced toward the windows, half expecting to see headlights pulling into his driveway or shadows moving outside. Nothing stirred, but the unease lingered. Determined to stay alert, Jack grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and leaned it against the wall near the front door. Then he double-checked the locks on every window and door, making sure they were secure. It was probably unnecessary. After all, he had no proof that Mr. Gray posed any real threat, but it made him feel marginally better. Afterward, he settled onto the couch, flipping through TV channels but unable to focus on anything. His thoughts kept drifting back to the Jeep, the circuit board, and the enigmatic man who had driven away into the night. Hours passed, and exhaustion finally began to creep in. Jack debated whether to call it a night or stay awake a little longer just in case. Before he could decide, a sharp knock echoed through the house, startling him. His heart skipped a beat as he froze, staring at the front door. Who could be visiting at this hour? Slowly, cautiously, he rose from the couch and crept toward the window, peering through the curtains. Outside, illuminated by the dim porch light, stood two men in dark suits. Their stern expressions and clipped movements screamed authority. Jack swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the curtain tightly. Were these men friends of Mr. Gray? Enemies? Or something else entirely? Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to calm down. If they meant harm, they wouldn't have knocked, they would have broken in. Still, he grabbed the baseball bat before opening the door a crack. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to sound confident despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. One of the men held up a badge. "Mr. Turner, we're with the government. We need to speak with you urgently." Government agents? Jack's mind raced. Had they traced Mr. Gray here? Did they know about the repairs? He hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside, allowing them to enter. As they filed into his living room, their eyes scanned the space with practiced precision, taking in every detail. "We understand you recently serviced a vehicle belonging to a man known as Mr. Gray," one of them said, cutting straight to the point. His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for evasion. Jack nodded slowly, his grip tightening on the bat. "Yeah, I did. What's this about?" The second agent pulled out a photo and handed it to Jack. It showed the same Jeep he'd worked on earlier, though cleaner and without the layers of dirt. "This vehicle is linked to a series of security breaches at a nearby military installation. We believe it may have been used to transport stolen classified materials." Jack's jaw dropped. Stolen classified materials? That explained the advanced tech and the secrecy, but it also raised 100 new questions. "I didn't know any of that," he stammered. "He just showed up here, said his Jeep broke down, and offered to pay me to fix it. I swear I had no idea." The agents exchanged a glance, then nodded. "We believe you, Mr. Turner," the first one said, "but your involvement doesn't end here. By repairing the vehicle, you've inadvertently aided a fugitive. We need your cooperation to track him down." Jack sank onto the couch, overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. In the span of a single day, he'd gone from being a simple mechanic to an unwitting accomplice in what sounded like a major crime. The agents assured him he wasn't in trouble, but their presence and their questions left him shaken. As they continued to press him for details, Jack realized this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test his courage, his integrity, and his ability to navigate a world far darker than anything he'd ever imagined. The agents' questions came fast and relentless, each one probing deeper into Jack's encounter with Mr. Gray. They wanted to know everything: what the man had said, how he'd acted, whether he'd mentioned any destinations or plans. Jack did his best to answer truthfully, but the more he spoke, the more he realized just how little he actually knew. Mr. Gray had been vague, almost deliberately so, offering only the barest details about himself and his Jeep. He hadn't even given a last name, just Gray, as if it were some kind of alias. Despite his limited knowledge, the agents seemed satisfied with Jack's answers. They reassured him repeatedly that he wasn't in trouble, which should have been comforting, but instead, it left him feeling uneasy. If he wasn't a suspect, then why were they here? What role did they expect him to play in tracking down someone who clearly didn't want to be found? And most importantly, what would happen if Mr. Gray discovered that Jack had talked to them? "We'll need you to keep this conversation confidential," one of the agents said, breaking Jack's train of thought. His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "If Mr. Gray finds out we're onto him, it could jeopardize our investigation and put you at risk." Jack nodded slowly, though his mind was racing. Risk. He'd already taken precautions by locking up his house and keeping the baseball bat close, but now the stakes felt higher than ever. These weren't ordinary criminals they were dealing with. These were people capable of stealing classified materials and modifying vehicles to evade detection. If Mr. Gray, or whoever he really was, decided Jack posed a threat, there was no telling what he might do. The agents stayed for nearly an hour, asking follow-up questions and jotting down notes in small notepads. They photographed the circuit board and other parts Jack had salvaged from the Jeep, explaining that forensics teams might be able to extract useful information from them. When they finally left, promising to stay in touch, Jack closed the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. The weight of the evening pressed down on him like a physical force. For the first time in his life, he felt truly vulnerable, not just because of the situation itself, but because he had no control over what came next. Unable to sleep, Jack spent the rest of the night pacing his living room, replaying the events of the past few hours in his head. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made him jump. He kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see headlights pulling into his driveway or shadows lurking in the darkness. But nothing happened. By the time dawn broke, casting soft golden light through the curtains, Jack had managed to convince himself that maybe, just maybe, he was safe. After all, the agents had said they were monitoring the situation closely. Surely they wouldn't let anything happen to him, but fate has a way of proving assumptions wrong. It was late afternoon when the quiet of Jack's day was shattered. He had spent the morning tinkering with an old truck in his garage, trying to distract himself from the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in his mind. The rhythmic clanging of tools against metal provided a sense of normalcy, a reminder that life still went on, even in the face of uncertainty. Outside, the weather was mild, with a gentle breeze rustling the trees. Everything seemed peaceful, until the rumble of engines filled the air. At first, Jack assumed it was another customer arriving for repairs, but as the sound grew louder, he stepped out of the garage to investigate, and froze. Rolling down the dirt road toward his property were several military trucks, their massive frames kicking up clouds of dust. Soldiers poured out of the vehicles, clad in camouflage uniforms and armed with rifles slung across their chests. They moved with precision, fanning out around his house and garage as if preparing for battle. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. What was going on? Had something happened to Mr. Gray? Was this retaliation for talking to the agents? Or worse, had the rogue operative returned to silence him? Panic surged through him as he watched the soldiers surround his home, their faces masked by helmets and goggles. One of them approached the front door, shouting orders for him to come out with his hands up. For a moment, Jack considered barricading himself inside. It was instinctive, a primal response to danger. But reason quickly took over. These weren't criminals or mercenaries. They were soldiers, disciplined and trained. Fighting back would be futile, and besides, he hadn't done anything wrong. Taking a deep breath, Jack raised his hands above his head and stepped outside, squinting against the glare of the truck's headlights. "Stay where you are," the commanding officer barked, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Do not move until we secure the area." Jack obeyed, standing motionless as the soldiers swept through his property. They searched the garage, inspecting every tool, every scrap of metal, every corner of the space where he worked daily. Inside the house, they combed through rooms, opening drawers and cabinets, checking under beds and behind curtains. It was invasive, unsettling, and utterly overwhelming. Yet Jack remained silent, too stunned to protest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the commanding officer approached him. Up close, the man looked younger than Jack had expected, his features sharp and focused beneath the helmet. "Mr. Turner?" he asked, his tone softer now but still authoritative. "Yes," Jack replied, his voice trembling slightly. "What's going on?" The officer hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "We have reason to believe you may be targeted by individuals involved in a high-level security breach. Our intelligence suggests that the fugitive you encountered, Mr. Gray, may attempt to return here to eliminate potential witnesses." Jack's stomach churned. Witnesses. That word hit him like a punch to the gut. Until now, he'd clung to the hope that his involvement in this mess was incidental, a mere coincidence. But hearing it framed this way, that he was a witness, someone whose testimony could potentially bring down a dangerous criminal, made the reality sink in. He wasn't just collateral damage anymore. He was a target. "We're here to protect you," the officer continued. "But you need to understand the gravity of the situation. This isn't just about stolen equipment. It's about national security. The individuals we're dealing with are highly skilled and extremely dangerous. If they think you pose a threat, they won't hesitate to act." Jack nodded numbly, his mind struggling to process everything. The soldiers set up a perimeter around his property, positioning themselves strategically to monitor the area. Floodlights illuminated the grounds, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the fading sunlight. Jack was instructed to remain indoors and avoid using phones or electronics, unless absolutely necessary. Even the smallest slip-up, the officer warned, could compromise the operation. As night fell, Jack sat alone in his living room, staring at the walls as if they might provide answers. The house felt suffocating, despite its familiarity. Outside, the hum of generators and the occasional murmur of voices reminded him that he was far from alone, but also that his life had changed irrevocably. No longer was he just a mechanic fixing cars and chatting with neighbors. Now he was a pawn in a game he barely understood, caught between forces far greater than himself. Sleep eluded him that night. Every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves, the faint buzz of insects, set his nerves on edge. He alternated between watching the soldiers patrol his yard and replaying the events of the past 2 days in his mind. How had this happened? What had he done to deserve this? And most importantly, how would it end? By the time dawn broke again, Jack was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The adrenaline that had fueled him during the initial chaos had worn off, leaving him drained and disoriented. He stared out the window at the soldiers, wondering how long they would stay, how long he would have to live like this. Part of him hoped Mr. Gray would be caught soon, bringing an end to the nightmare, but another part feared what might happen if he wasn't, if the fugitive slipped through the cracks and came looking for revenge. For now, all Jack could do was wait. Wait, watch, and pray that the storm brewing around him would pass without claiming him as its victim. The hours passed slowly as Jack sat in his dimly lit living room, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Outside, the soldiers maintained their vigilant watch, their movements steady and methodical. Floodlights bathed the property in harsh white light, creating an eerie contrast against the darkened sky. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was living in a movie, one where ordinary people were thrust into extraordinary and dangerous circumstances. But this wasn't fiction. It was real, and every second felt like an eternity. To pass the time, Jack tried to focus on mundane tasks, tidying up the cluttered coffee table, flipping through old magazines, even attempting to sketch a rough diagram of the Jeep's modifications from memory, anything to distract himself from the looming threat outside. Yet no matter how hard he tried, his thoughts kept circling back to Mr. Gray. Who was he really? What had driven him to steal classified technology? And why had he chosen Jack's garage of all places to fix his vehicle? As the night wore on, the commanding officer, a man named Captain Hayes, entered the house to check on Jack. He carried a tablet under one arm and wore a look of calm professionalism that somehow managed to be both reassuring and intimidating. "How are you holding up?" he asked, taking a seat across from Jack. "I've been better," Jack admitted with a weak laugh. "This isn't exactly how I imagined my week going." Captain Hayes nodded sympathetically. "I can only imagine, but we're doing everything we can to ensure your safety. In the meantime, there are a few more things we need to discuss." Jack braced himself. "Like what?" "For starters," Hayes began, tapping the screen of his tablet, "we've identified the rogue operative you encountered. His real name is Ethan Cole, a former intelligence contractor who went off the grid 6 months ago after being implicated in a series of illegal arms deals. We believe he's using the stolen technology to sell to the highest bidder, likely foreign entities interested in gaining an edge over us." Jack's stomach tightened. Arms deals? Foreign buyers? This was far beyond anything he'd anticipated. "So he's not just some random guy trying to stay hidden?" Hayes shook his head. "Not even close. Cole is highly trained, resourceful, and dangerous. That's why we're taking extra precautions here. If he suspects you know too much, or worse, if he thinks you've cooperated with us, it could put you in grave danger." The gravity of the situation hit Jack like a ton of bricks. For the first time, he fully grasped the enormity of what was happening. This wasn't about fixing a broken-down Jeep anymore. It was about preventing a national security disaster. And somehow, he had become entangled in the middle of it. "Is there any chance they'll catch him soon?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "We're working around the clock," Hayes assured him. "But Cole is smart. He knows how to cover his tracks. Until we apprehend him, you'll need to remain under protection." Jack sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "How long will that take? Days? Weeks? Months?" "That depends," Hayes replied honestly. "It could be resolved quickly or it could drag out. Either way, we won't leave until we're certain you're safe." Though the captain's words were meant to reassure him, they only added to Jack's growing sense of helplessness. The idea of living indefinitely under military guard was suffocating. He missed the simplicity of his old life, the routine of fixing cars, chatting with customers, enjoying quiet evenings alone. Now, those simple pleasures felt like distant memories, replaced by fear and paranoia. As dawn approached, the soldiers, rotated shifts maintaining their constant vigilance. Jack watched them through the window, marveling at their discipline and precision. They moved like machines, each action calculated and deliberate. It was clear they took their mission seriously, and that gave Jack a small measure of comfort. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging thought that something was bound to go wrong. After all, Ethan Cole didn't strike him as someone who would give up easily. By mid-morning, the tension reached a breaking point. A loud crash echoed from the direction of the garage, followed by shouts from the soldiers stationed outside. Jack bolted upright, his heart racing. Had Cole returned? Was this the moment he'd been dreading? Before he could react, 2 soldiers burst into the house, their weapons drawn. "Stay low," one of them ordered, ushering Jack toward the floor. He complied immediately, crouching behind the couch as chaos erupted outside. Gunfire rang out sharp and deafening, accompanied by the screech of tires and the revving of engines. Through the window, Jack caught glimpses of movement, soldiers scrambling for cover, vehicles speeding away, and the faint silhouette of a figure disappearing into the trees. Moments later, Captain Hayes reappeared, his expression grim. "We've got a situation," he said tersely. "Cole tried to breach the perimeter but escaped before we could detain him." Jack's blood ran cold. "Does that mean he's coming back?" "It's possible," Hayes admitted. "But we've increased security measures. Reinforcements are en route, and we're setting up additional barriers around the property. You're not leaving our site until this is over." Despite the reassurance, Jack couldn't shake the image of Cole slipping through the shadows, always, one step ahead. The man was relentless, cunning, and seemingly unstoppable. How could anyone hope to catch him? Over the next several hours, the soldiers worked tirelessly to fortify the area. Barricades were erected along the driveway, motion sensors were installed in the surrounding woods, and drones patrolled the skies above. Jack remained indoors, glued to the window as he observed the flurry of activity. Though the immediate danger seemed to have passed, the threat still loomed large in his mind. As evening fell, Captain Hayes joined Jack again, this time with a laptop in hand. "We've made some progress," he announced, placing the device on the coffee table. On the screen was a map dotted with red markers. "These are locations where Cole has been spotted recently. Based on his movements, we've narrowed down potential hideouts. With luck, we'll corner him within the next 24 hours. Jack studied the map, his eyes tracing the scattered dots. "What happens if you catch him?" "If we catch him," Hayes corrected, emphasizing the uncertainty, "he'll be taken into custody and interrogated. Any information he provides could prevent further breaches and hopefully lead us to whoever he's working with." "And what happens to me?" Jack asked quietly. "You'll be free to return to your normal life," Hayes promised. "Once Cole is neutralized, the risk to you will diminish significantly. Of course, we'll offer counseling and support to help you process everything that's happened." Jack nodded, though the prospect of returning to normalcy felt distant and surreal. Could he ever truly go back to the way things were? Would he ever feel safe again? For now, all he could do was wait and trust that the soldiers surrounding his home would keep their word. As another sleepless night stretched ahead, Jack found solace in one undeniable truth. He wasn't alone in this fight. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it alongside those determined to bring Ethan Cole to justice. The hours dragged on as Jack sat in his living room, the hum of generators and occasional murmur of soldiers' voices outside providing a constant reminder of the danger that still loomed. Despite Captain Hayes' reassurances, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan Cole was out there somewhere, watching, waiting, plotting his next move. The idea of being hunted by someone so skilled and dangerous weighed heavily on him, making it impossible to relax. Every shadow seemed menacing, every sound suspicious. To distract himself, Jack tried to focus on small tasks around the house. He brewed a pot of coffee, though he doubted caffeine would calm his nerves. He rearranged books on the shelf, organized old receipts into neat piles, and even attempted to polish a pair of boots he hadn't worn in years. But no matter how many mundane chores he tackled, his mind kept drifting back to the same questions. Where was Cole now? What was he planning? And why had he chosen Jack's garage as part of his scheme? By mid-afternoon, Captain Hayes returned with an update. His face was drawn, his eyes sharp but weary, a clear sign that the pressure of the mission was taking its toll. "We've identified one of Cole's likely hideouts," he announced, pulling up a satellite image on his laptop. It showed a cluster of abandoned buildings deep in the woods, about 20 miles from Jack's property. "Intelligence suggests he's been using this location as a base of operations." Jack leaned forward, studying the image intently. The structures looked dilapidated, their roofs sagging and walls crumbling. They were the kind of places people avoided unless they had something to hide. "Do you think he's still there?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with both hope and dread. "It's hard to say," Hayes replied, "but we're preparing for a raid tonight. If we act quickly and quietly, we might be able to catch him off guard." Jack swallowed hard, imagining the scene unfolding in the darkness. Soldiers storming the compound, guns drawn, searching for a man who wouldn't go down without a fight. Would they find Cole? Or would he slip away again, leaving them chasing shadows? As the day wore on, the atmosphere grew tense. Soldiers moved with renewed urgency, double-checking equipment, reviewing plans, and coordinating communication channels. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter of Jack's property, while drones buzzed overhead, scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of movement. Reinforcements arrived in armored vehicles, their presence adding another layer of security, but also underscoring the seriousness of the situation. Despite the heightened precautions, Jack couldn't help but feel like a sitting duck. The soldiers were doing everything they could to protect him, but what if Cole found a way past them? What if he decided to make a bold move under cover of darkness? The thought made Jack's skin crawl. Night fell, and the world outside became eerily quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as if anticipating the chaos to come. Inside the house, Jack paced nervously, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Time felt distorted, each second stretching endlessly while simultaneously racing toward the inevitable confrontation. Around midnight, Captain Hayes entered the living room, his expression grim but resolute. "It's time," he said simply. "Our teams are moving into position. We'll keep you updated throughout the operation." Jack nodded, his throat too dry to speak. He watched as Hayes stepped outside, joining the other soldiers gathered near the trucks. Moments later, engines roared to life, and the convoy rolled out, disappearing into the night. For the first time since the siege began, Jack was truly alone, with only his thoughts and the faint glow of the floodlights for company. He sat on the couch, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee, and stared at the empty driveway. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets or rustle of leaves. Hours passed, each one heavier than the last. Jack alternated between staring out the window and checking his phone for updates, though he knew none would come until the mission was complete. Finally, just as dawn began to break, headlights appeared in the distance. Jack sprang to his feet, heart pounding as the vehicles rolled back into view. Soldiers poured out, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also relief. Captain Hayes approached the house, his steps steady despite the long night behind him. "We got him," he announced, his tone triumphant yet measured. "Cole resisted arrest, but our team subdued him. He's in custody now." A wave of relief washed over Jack, followed by disbelief. After days of fear and uncertainty, it was finally over. Ethan Cole, the man who had turned his life upside down, was no longer a threat. "What happens next?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He'll be transported to a secure facility for interrogation," Hayes explained. "Any information he provides will help us dismantle the network he's been working with. As for you, the immediate danger has passed. We'll maintain a presence here for a little while longer just to be safe, but you should be able to resume your normal routine soon." Jack exhaled deeply, sinking onto the couch as the weight of the past few days began to lift. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to imagine a future free from fear, a future where he could return to his garage, fix cars, and live without looking over his shoulder. But as grateful as he was for the outcome, Jack couldn't ignore the lingering sense of unease. This experience had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. He'd seen firsthand the lengths some people would go to for power and profit, and it left him questioning the world. He thought he understood. Could he ever trust strangers again? Would he always wonder if the next customer walking into his shop had ulterior motives? Over the next few days, life slowly began to return to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. The soldiers packed up their equipment and departed, leaving Jack's property quiet once more. Neighbors stopped by to check on him, offering words of support and curiosity about the military activity they'd witnessed. Jack kept his explanations vague, not wanting to draw unnecessary attention to himself or risk violating confidentiality agreements with the authorities. Captain Hayes visited one final time before leaving town, bringing with him a folder containing details about the stolen technology and Cole's illicit dealings. "You played a bigger role in this than you realize," Hayes told Jack. "Your repair work gave us critical insights into his modifications. Without that information, catching him might have taken much longer." Jack accepted the praise humbly, though he still struggled to see himself as anything more than a mechanic caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still, knowing that his efforts had contributed to bringing Cole to justice provided a small measure of closure. As the weeks passed, Jack found solace in routine. He reopened his garage, welcomed back customers, and threw himself into his work with renewed determination. Yet beneath the surface, he carried the lessons of those harrowing days, a deeper appreciation for the fragility of safety, a sharper awareness of the hidden dangers lurking in plain sight, and a quiet pride in having faced adversity head-on. One evening, as he closed up shop and prepared to head home, Jack paused to look out at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of peace, not because the scars of the past had faded, but because he knew he had survived them. And perhaps, in surviving, he had grown stronger than he ever imagined. In the weeks that followed Ethan Cole's capture, Jack found himself walking a delicate line between moving forward and processing everything he'd been through. On the surface, life seemed to return to its familiar rhythm. The garage was busy, again, filled with the hum of engines and the chatter of customers. Neighbors stopped by to share stories or ask for advice on car troubles, just as they always had. Yet beneath the routine, Jack carried an invisible weight, a mix of gratitude, unease, and a newfound awareness of how fragile normalcy could be. The authorities stayed in touch after the raid, keeping Jack informed about the ongoing investigation into Cole's network. It turned out that the stolen technology wasn't just advanced, it was groundbreaking. Designed for military use, it included encryption systems capable of bypassing even the most secure communications networks. If Cole had succeeded in selling it to foreign buyers, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Every time Jack heard updates about the case, he felt a strange swirl of emotions: relief that the threat had been neutralized, but also disbelief that his small repair shop had played such a pivotal role in uncovering it. As part of their efforts to ensure Jack's safety, the government offered him protection services for several months. A discreet team monitored his property remotely, using cameras and motion sensors to detect any suspicious activity. At first, Jack appreciated the extra layer of security, but over time, he began to feel suffocated by it. He wanted his independence back, the freedom to take evening walks without checking over his shoulder or leave his house without wondering if someone might be watching. Slowly, he worked with the authorities to scale back the measures until he felt comfortable standing on his own again. Despite the lingering tension, Jack couldn't deny that the experience had changed him in unexpected ways. For one thing, he'd developed a deeper respect for the intricacies of modern technology. Before Cole's Jeep rolled into his driveway, Jack had thought of cars as purely mechanical objects, engines, gears, and wires working together to keep people moving. But now he understood how vehicles could serve purposes far beyond transportation. They could carry secrets, shield operatives, and even become tools in high-stakes operations. This realization sparked a fascination in him, leading him to research advancements in automotive engineering and cybersecurity during his downtime. Another change came in the form of perspective. Before this ordeal, Jack had lived a relatively sheltered life, content with his quiet corner of the world. He knew his neighbors, trusted his customers, and rarely questioned the motives of those around him. But after meeting Ethan Cole and seeing firsthand the lengths some people would go to for power and profit, Jack became more cautious. He started paying closer attention to the details, the way someone spoke, the questions they asked, the subtle signs of nervousness or deception. Not because he expected everyone to be hiding something, but because he'd learned that danger often wore a friendly face. Still, Jack refused to let fear dictate his life. Instead, he channeled his experiences into something positive. When the military reached out to offer him a consulting position, helping them analyze modified vehicles and identify potential threats, he accepted without hesitation. It wasn't full-time work, just occasional assignments when his expertise was needed, but it gave him a sense of purpose beyond fixing everyday cars. More importantly, it allowed him to contribute to something bigger than himself, using his skills to protect others from the kind of chaos he'd endured. Word of Jack's involvement with the military spread quietly around town, earning him a mix of admiration and curiosity. Some customers teased him good-naturedly, calling him the secret agent mechanic and asking if he'd start charging double for oil changes. Others treated him with a newfound respect, impressed by his bravery and resourcefulness. Jack took it all in stride, deflecting attention whenever possible. He didn't want to be seen as a hero. He was just a man doing his job, one that happened to intersect with extraordinary circumstances. One day, as Jack worked on a customer's sedan, a young woman approached the garage cautiously. She looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting someone to follow her. When she introduced herself as Sarah, a journalist writing a piece on local heroes, Jack hesitated. He wasn't comfortable being in the spotlight, especially not for something so personal. But there was something genuine about her demeanor, so he agreed to answer a few questions, on the condition that she kept certain details private. Over coffee at a nearby diner, Sarah listened intently as Jack recounted parts of his story. He left out classified information, focusing instead on the broader lessons he'd learned. The importance of staying vigilant, trusting your instincts, and finding strength in adversity. By the end of their conversation, Sarah smiled warmly. "You're inspiring, you know that," she said. "Not many people would handle something like this with such grace." Jack chuckled softly. "I wouldn't call it graceful. I made mistakes, got scared, and doubted myself plenty of times. But I guess that's what makes us human, right? We stumble, we learn, and hopefully, we come out stronger on the other side." Sarah nodded, jotting down notes before thanking him and heading off to write her article. A few days later, the piece appeared in the local newspaper, painting Jack as a humble yet courageous figure who had risen to the occasion when it mattered most. While he cringed at some of the praise, he couldn't deny that it brought a smile to his face. Maybe telling his story, even in a small way, could inspire others to face their own challenges with courage and resilience. Months passed, and the memory of Ethan Cole faded slightly, though it never disappeared entirely. Jack continued running, his garage taking pride in the work he did and the lives he touched. He also embraced his new role as a consultant, traveling occasionally to assist with investigations or train others in vehicle analysis. Each assignment reminded him of how much he'd grown since that fateful rainy afternoon when a mysterious Jeep limped into his driveway. On quiet evenings, Jack often sat on his porch, sipping coffee and reflecting on the journey he'd been through. The scars of the past were still there, faint but present, shaping the person he had become. He no longer feared them. Instead, he saw them as reminders of his strength and adaptability. Life, he realized, was unpredictable, and sometimes it threw curveballs that tested your limits. But it was also beautiful, filled with moments of connection, growth, and triumph. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape, Jack felt a deep sense of peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready for whatever came next. After all, he'd already faced one of the greatest storms of his life and emerged stronger than ever. And if another challenge arose, He knew he'd meet it head-on, just as he always had, with determination, integrity, and an unshakable belief in the power of doing what's right.